Hello there everyone, welcome to the channel if you're new, welcome back if you are not. I am EDJ, and we are continuing with basically the hierarchy of the Senate, and yeah, now we're moving on to basically Praetors, which is almost a consult, which seems to be like, yeah, the ultimate. So, yeah, it's gonna be really cool to see, just continuing more with understanding the responsibilities that each position within the overall Senate has. So, yeah, I don't really have much else to say other than let's get to it, shall we? Without any further ado, let's learn about Praetors.
The second highest office in the cursus honorum was the Praetor. If you were lucky enough to be elected Praetor, you were officially a big shot in Rome. There were 8 Praetors on any given year, which meant that competition was fierce. Most quaestors never made it to Praetor, and had to be satisfied with their lifetime membership to the Senate, with virtually no legislative power. Praetors were essentially judges, and were responsible for adjudicating the Republic's laws. However, we need to shift our perspective a little bit if we really want to understand this. Ancient societies revered judges much more than we do today. The power to judge, or the power to determine right and wrong, or the power over life and death, was usually within the king's authority. It was a big deal at the time that the Romans devolved this power to their elected representatives. If we traveled back in time and observed a Roman trial, we would actually find it pretty easy to follow. Our modern legal system is heavily influenced by the Roman one.
I'm telling you, man, the Romans they might be the most influential empire of all time. Like, I'm struggling to think of what other empire left such a lasting mark on the world that is still very prevalent today. Like, yeah, I don't think there'll ever be another Rome, man. They were just built different, you know, to use modern slang.
The praetor, or judge, would preside over the trial, which would have a defending advocate and a prosecuting advocate. Many trials even had juries, which was another democratizing innovation that would have terrified monarchical societies at the time. Roman jurists, when it came time to vote, were given 3 wax tablets. One with an A for absolutio, or absolution. One with a C for condemnatio, or condemnation, and one with an N and an L for non-liquid, for situations where neither side proved their case. When it came time to decide, each jurist secretly slid one tablet into a voting container, after which the votes were counted and the defendant's fate was decided. One of the really important bits for praetors came at this point. If the defendant was condemned, the praetor got to unilaterally decide the punishment. He only had a few options: fines, physical punishment, banishment from the city, or death. There was no organized prison system in ancient Rome. They had one small jailhouse which was run by literally 3 civil servants, but that was mostly just used as a holding area for executions. One big difference that would make Roman law unrecognizable to us today was the fact that it was a spectator sport. In a weird way, it kind of makes sense, because the 2 advocates and the judge would usually be famous politicians. In hyper-political Rome, if you were a fan, or an ally, or a client of a certain senator, you might want to go see him argue his big murder case. Or
you know, that's funny, because in a weird way, it kind of is nowadays. Like, you know, famous, like, trials, right? Like, the most infamous, probably the O.J. Simpson case. Last big one I can think of was the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard one. It's like, in a weird way, I mean, granted, people are kind of there for not the lawyers themselves. Usually the lawyers are the afterthought. It's really mainly the celebrity usually in question. But yeah, I just kind of thought, like, we have televised courts and whatnot, like trials, and they can gain a lot of media attention. So in a weird way, it kind of is a battle, right? Of like the legal system. Man, if Romans had television, you kidding me? Oh boy.
you might just want to go for the fun. According to our sources, people got rowdy. There are a lot of accounts of audience participation during the trials. There was applauding and hissing. There was times when advocates would turn their backs to the jury and just play to the crowd. People would make jokes at the expense of the people on trial, and sometimes there would just be open fights in the crowd. It was crazy.
There have been examples like that in court cases. It's not the norm here in America for any of that to happen, but it's happened, you know. So man, court would have been fun, because some people want to get out of jury duty, you know. Funny thing is, I've escaped jury duty 3 times in a span of like 3 years. So wait, 19, like 3 to 4 years. Yeah, I was called like 3 times and I escaped. So I'm quite the Chad, but in that regard. But yeah, overall, I think if courts were more like this, I think more people would want to be like, you know what, I could see a fight or two right now. Oh man.
Despite all of this, we should not gloss over the fact that the Romans were extremely proud of their legal system. It's why they held the praetors in such high regard. The Romans had a special term for the kind of pseudo-kingly power that the praetors wielded. They called it imperium. But imperium was a two-sided coin. Imperium also gave praetors the authority to command armies. Let's not get crazy here. Praetors were still subservient to consuls, and consuls were responsible for the defense of the republic. But in a pinch, a praetor was seen as capable of commanding an army. Or, and this was much more common, they were seen as capable of acting as a consul's second-in-command. It turns out that the Romans, to whom jingoism was the norm, were highly motivated by this. One interesting thing to note here is that the Romans saw absolutely no distinction between political talent and military talent. In their eyes, a good judge would make a good general, and a good general would make a good legislator. This may explain their unusual propensity to award military commands to charismatic public speakers. But back to Imperium.
That's interesting, because, you know, I think nowadays, obviously, we don't think a good lawyer is gonna lead an army. Like, nowadays, we're like, well, no, but it's interesting that there was no distinction back then with the Romans. It almost makes me wonder how many actually were capable, or how many really did bad in that regard. But Caesar's an exceptional person, right? Like, Caesar could do it all.
Praetors had it, and they were just itching to use it. The praetorship was the lowest rank on the cursus honorum, where, when the 1-year term of office was over, the office holder was eligible to be governor of a province. The selection process was entirely in the Senate's hands, so as you can imagine, a lot of the praetor's time and energy was spent trying to position himself to get a good province. People generally used their time as governor to make back some of the money they had to spend to get there in the first place. Once in the provinces, away from the consuls, a governor exercised supreme military and judicial power, with very little oversight. Bribes were traded freely, and an unscrupulous governor could easily make a fortune overnight. Also, as the head of the provincial military, there was plenty of money to be made through conquest. Commanders of armies generally kept about 20% of the spoils of war, which, it has to be said, included human beings. This is why rich, or exotic, or even rebellious provinces were preferred over boring ones. Now, imagine how Caesar felt during his year as consul, when Cato successfully pushed a bill through the Senate, stating that Caesar was to be given governorship over Italy, so that he could take care of the bandit problem. It was humiliating. There was no money.
That's interesting. Yeah, I never thought of it like that. Yeah, I never thought of it like that, yeah. Conquest, obviously, war is a big part of Rome, but, conquest and certain provinces being better than others, people fighting over it, right? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and there is a, yeah, and depending on where you go, you can also make a lot of money, so, yeah, that makes sense.
To be made in this. there was no glory, and there was no towns to capture. People started making jokes behind Caesar's back about how he was going to be governing flocks of sheep. Caesar was eventually able to secure another province for himself, but it took a lot of political maneuvering. Cato was an interesting guy. He was a hard-line, staunch conservative, and a key political opponent of Caesar. He's also pertinent to this video because he never rose to the level of consul. He died a lowly praetor, but he was still able to throw his weight around in the Senate, and make enough of a difference where he made it into our history books. Praetors, unlike the offices under them, were actually able to make a difference in the Senate. Remember, speaking order in the Senate went like this. First, the presiding magistrate who called the Senate to order got to speak, which was usually a sitting consul. Then, the princeps senatus got to speak. Then, any other current consuls could speak. Then, any former consuls. Then, the current praetors, followed by the ex-praetors. Then the current aediles, followed by the former aediles. Then, of course, the current quaestors, followed by the former quaestors. It was pretty rare that debate got below the former praetors, since there were obviously a lot of them. The writer Anthony Everett claims that Cicero didn't even make a speech supporting or opposing a piece of legislation until after he was elected praetor. Cato, as an influential former praetor, was able to mobilize the debate in opposition to Caesar in a way that an aedile never could. In fact, a famous example of this happened again during Caesar's year as consul. The Roman Senate could only legally meet between sunup and sundown, because, the Romans just loved rules. Caesar's big legislative agenda during his consulship was this giant land reform bill, which was very generous towards military veterans, who happened to be Caesar's allies, and very expensive towards the state. During a Senate debate on this, Cato rose to speak, and began filibustering, intending to speak until the sun went down and debate had to be suspended. Cato had pulled this trick on Caesar once before, and Caesar was in no mood for games. He used his consular authority to have Cato arrested on the spot. Shocked.
Yeah, I remember that. That was not a good way to endear yourself, Caesar. It wasn't like his first day too or something. It was really early on. So yeah, Cato... I know I've kind of made fun of Cato, like he just comes across as just Caesar's hater and he's kind of a bit annoying, but I guess it is interesting to see a little bit more about him, and yeah, I guess how influential he was. A lowly praetor, managed to be as influential as he is quite an accomplishment. We all remember Cato now.
Senators rose to their feet, declaring that the Senate would be happy to continue debate in the jailhouse with Cato. After several hours of utter chaos, Caesar relented and just released Cato from prison. Again, Cato never became consul, but look at what he was able to get away with. He ran for consul several times, by the way, but weirdly refused to campaign. He said that if the people really wanted him, his reputation could speak for itself. Apparently, they never wanted him.
Okay, that's the weirdest strategy ever. I can't imagine like a current politician being like, "Alright, I'm gonna try to get this, but I'm not gonna say anything or do anything. I'll let the people decide." Oh, okay, though. That's the funniest strategy I've heard yet.
Now, at last, we're left with only Rome's highest office remaining. Consul. Stay tuned, because this next one's going to be a doozy.
Alright, so next time we are going to learn about what it takes to be a consul of Rome. And just how much we kind of have been well acquainted with consulship, mainly watching the main Julius Caesar series. I think that's the one that gets highlighted the most, right? That power. But it'll be cool to see if I can learn anything new from it. And yeah, another solid video. So I'll be jumping to that one. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye everyone.